A millionaire asked her to pretend to be his girlfriend for 3 minutes, to escape a wedding. Before we explore all the details of this incredible story, tell us where you're following us from and the time. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss a thing, and let's embark on this journey together. Some lies are born out of desperation, and tonight, Elian Mercer was about to tell the biggest one of his life. The crystal chandeliers of the Beverly Hills Art Center cast golden shadows across marble floors, while Los Angeles' elite mingled beneath million-dollar installations. Elian stood motionless near a contemporary sculpture, his tailored charcoal suit impeccable, his expression unreadable. At 34, he had mastered the art of appearing composed, while his world crumbled around him. "Ladies and gentlemen," his mother's voice cut through the ambient chatter like a blade. Vivienne Mercer, draped in emerald silk and decades of social authority, had commandeered the microphone. "I have the most wonderful announcement to share." Elian's stomach dropped. The champagne flute in his hand trembled imperceptibly. "My son Elian, the brilliant mind behind tonight's breathtaking curation, has just gotten engaged to the lovely Penelope Ashworth." The room erupted in applause. Camera flashes burst like lightning. Reporters materialized from thin air, smartphones raised, broadcasting live to thousands. Elian watched in horror as Penelope, blonde, pristine, and completely complicit, glided toward him with a predatory smile. This wasn't happening. This couldn't be happening. His carefully constructed life, built on quiet excellence and strategic invisibility, was being dismantled in real time. The art world respected him for his discretion, his ability to let the work speak louder than the man. Now his mother had turned him into tabloid fodder. Penelope reached for his arm, her manicured fingers cold against his sleeve. "Darling," she purred loud enough for the microphones to catch, "aren't you going to kiss your fiancé?" Elian's eyes swept the room desperately. He needed an escape route, a distraction, anything to... That's when he saw her. Tucked into a corner booth near the bar, completely oblivious to the chaos, sat a woman with rich mahogany skin and an aura of serene detachment. She wore wireless earbuds, her head slightly tilted as if listening to music only she could hear. Her natural hair was styled in elegant locks pulled back from her face, revealing high cheekbones and the kind of bone structure that belonged in Renaissance paintings. She was stunning in a way that felt effortless. No desperate attempt to command attention, no calculated poses for cameras, just presence, pure, magnetic presence. More importantly, she was alone, and she had no idea who he was. Without a second thought, Elian broke free from Penelope's grasp and strode across the gallery floor. Conversations parted around him like water. The cameras followed his movement, confused but captivated. The woman looked up as his shadow fell across her table. Up close, her beauty was even more striking. Luminous skin, intelligent dark eyes, and a slight furrow between her brows that suggested she was trying to process why a stranger in an expensive suit was hovering over her booth. She pulled out one earbud. "Can I help you?" Her voice was warm honey with just a hint of wariness. Smart woman. Elian leaned down, close enough that the cameras couldn't read his lips, close enough to catch the faint scent of vanilla and jasmine in her hair. "I need you to pretend to be my girlfriend," he whispered urgently. "Just for 3 minutes. Please." She blinked, those incredible eyes searching his face for signs of madness or danger. Behind them, he could hear his mother's voice rising in confusion, Penelope's heels clicking against marble as she approached, the murmur of reporters sensing a story. The woman, God, he didn't even know her name, tilted her head slightly. A small smile played at the corners of her mouth. "Just 3 minutes?" she asked quietly. 3 minutes, he confirmed. She stood with fluid grace, revealing a figure that the simple black dress she wore couldn't diminish. As she rose, she pulled out her other earbud and tucked them both into a small clutch. "I'm Callie," she said, extending her hand as if they were meeting at a perfectly normal cocktail party. Elian. His relief was so intense, he almost forgot they had an audience. She stepped closer, close enough that her hand could rest naturally on his chest. To anyone watching, they looked like lovers sharing an intimate moment. "So," Callie murmured, her eyes dancing with mischief, "what exactly did I just agree to?" That's when the first camera flash exploded in their faces, and Elian realized 3 minutes might change everything. If a complete stranger approached you at a crowded event and asked you to pretend to be their girlfriend for just 3 minutes, would you have the courage to say yes like Callie did? What would go through your mind in that moment? The flash was just the beginning. Within seconds, they were drowning in light. Callie's hand instinctively tightened on Elian's chest as reporters surged forward like a tide. She had agreed to 3 minutes of pretending, but nothing could have prepared her for the hurricane of attention now focused on them. "Mr. Mercer," a reporter shoved a microphone toward them. "Can you tell us about your relationship with this mystery woman?" Elian's arm slipped around Callie's waist with surprising naturalness. She could feel the tension radiating from his body, but his voice remained steady and controlled. "Some things are worth keeping private," he said, his tone carrying just enough warmth to suggest intimacy without revealing details. Callie tilted her head up to look at him, and for a moment she forgot they were performing. There was something vulnerable in his eyes, a gratitude so profound it made her chest tighten. This wasn't just about escaping an unwanted engagement. This man was drowning. "Darling," she heard herself say, the endearment rolling off her tongue like they'd been together for years. "Didn't you promise to show me the installation in the East Wing?" It was a perfect exit line. Elian's relief was palpable as he guided her through the crowd, his hand warm and protective at the small of her back. She caught glimpses of faces as they moved, his mother's shocked disapproval, a blonde woman who must be the discarded fiancé burning with fury, art patrons whispering behind champagne flutes. They slipped through a service corridor behind a Frank Stella painting, finally finding silence in a small preparation room filled with bubble wrap and art transport cases. Callie leaned against a workbench, suddenly aware that her heart was racing. "Thank you," Elian said quietly, running a hand through his dark hair. "I'm sorry, I know that was insane," Callie supplied, but she was smiling. "Yeah, it really was." In the harsh fluorescent light, she could study him properly for the first time. He was handsome in an understated way, sharp jawline, eyes the color of storm clouds, the kind of bone structure that belonged in art museums. But it was the way he held himself that intrigued her, like a man constantly braced for impact. "I'm Callie Jameson," she said properly, extending her hand again. "Freelance designer, accidental fake girlfriend, and apparently your salvation for the evening. Elian Mercer," his handshake was firm, warm. "Art curator, family disappointment, and officially in your debt." "Family disappointment?" She raised an eyebrow. "You curated tonight's exhibition. I saw the placard. This is your work. It's incredible." Something shifted in his expression, surprise flickering across his features, like he wasn't used to genuine compliments about his professional abilities. "You actually looked at the art?" he asked. "Most people at these events treat the installations like expensive wallpaper. Most people don't understand that good curation is about creating emotional journeys," Callie replied. "The way you position the Rothko adjacent to the contemporary pieces, it's not just aesthetically pleasing, it's conversational. Each piece responds to the next." Elian stared at her, and Callie felt heat rise in her cheeks. Maybe she'd overstepped, revealed too much of her own expertise. "How do you know about curation?" he asked, but his tone wasn't condescending. It was genuinely curious. "I studied visual arts at UCLA. Never finished, but I learned enough to recognize mastery when I see it." She shrugged, suddenly self-conscious. "I create content for design blogs now, nothing as sophisticated as this, but I understand the language." A knock on the door interrupted them. "Mr. Mercer," a security guard's voice. "Your mother is asking for..." The vulnerability vanished from Elian's face, replaced by a mask of composure that was probably his default setting. "Tell her I'll find her shortly." After the footsteps faded, he turned back to Callie. "I should let you go. You've done more than enough, and I'm sure you have somewhere to be." She should leave. This was clearly a complicated situation involving wealthy people and family drama, exactly the kind of mess she usually avoided. But something about the way he'd looked at her when she'd spoken about his work, the gratitude and surprise, made her hesitate. "Actually," she heard herself saying, "I don't have anywhere to be. My friend Tanya invited me tonight, but she disappeared with some gallery owner an hour ago. I was planning to call a rideshare home." "I could give you a ride," Elian offered quickly, then caught himself. "I mean, it's the least I can do, after putting you through that circus." Callie studied his face. There was something he wasn't saying, some other reason he was reluctant to let her leave. Maybe he was dreading facing his family alone. Maybe he was just lonely. "Okay," she said. "But I have one condition." His eyebrows rose slightly. "You have to tell me why your mother thought announcing a fake engagement was a good idea." For the first time that evening, Elian almost smiled. "That," he said, "is going to require more than a car ride to explain." As they prepared to leave the safety of the storage room, Callie wondered what she was getting herself into. 3 minutes had already turned into 30, and something told her this night was far from over. The valet brought around a midnight blue Tesla Model S, understated luxury, just like everything else about Elian Mercer. As they settled into the cream leather seats, Callie couldn't help but notice how he adjusted the mirrors, checked his blind spots, and fastened his seatbelt with methodical precision. Even his driving habits suggested a man who left nothing to chance. "Address?" he asked, fingers poised over the navigation screen. "Koreatown, the Wilshire building on 6th Street. She watched his eyebrows rise slightly. "Not what you expected." "I don't know what I expected," he admitted, pulling into traffic. The city lights painted streaks across the windshield as they headed east. "I realize I know absolutely nothing about the woman who just saved my life." Callie laughed, a sound that seemed to surprise him with its genuine warmth. "Saved your life? That's a bit dramatic, don't you think? You didn't see my mother's face when she announced that engagement." Elian's grip tightened on the steering wheel. "Vivian Mercer doesn't make suggestions, she makes declarations. In her mind, my marriage to Penelope Ashworth was already decided. Without asking you? Asking implies I have a choice in family matters." His voice carried years of resignation. "The Ashworths collect contemporary art. We curate it. A marriage would create a dynasty that controls significant portions of the West Coast art market." Callie turned in her seat to study his profile. "That's medieval. That's business." He merged onto the 101, the Hollywood sign glowing in the distance. "My parents built Mercer Acquisitions from nothing. They sacrificed everything for financial security. In their world, love is a luxury we can't afford." The vulnerability in his voice made Callie's chest ache. She'd grown up with parents who struggled financially, but never doubted their love for each other or for her. The idea of treating marriage like a corporate merger felt alien and heartbreaking. "What about what you want?" she asked quietly. Elian was quiet for so long that Callie wondered if he'd heard her. Finally, he spoke. "I used to think I wanted to disappear entirely, create beautiful spaces for other people, and never have to be seen myself. Art speaks louder than the artist, you know? But tonight, when those cameras were flashing and Penelope was reaching for me like I was already her property," he exhaled slowly. "For the first time in my life, I wanted to be someone else entirely, someone brave enough to choose." They exited into Koreatown, passing late-night barbecue restaurants and 24-hour spas, neon signs reflecting in puddles from an earlier rain. This was Callie's world, vibrant, diverse, real in a way that Beverly Hills never quite managed to be. "That building?" Elian asked, pointing to a modest apartment complex with decent bones but clearly aging infrastructure. "Third floor, corner unit." Callie unbuckled her seatbelt but didn't move to leave. "Can I ask you something?" "After tonight, you can ask me anything." "Why me? In that room full of art world royalty, why did you choose the woman sitting alone with headphones?" Elian turned off the engine, and suddenly the car felt more intimate. Outside, the city hummed with late-night energy, but inside their bubble, everything was still. "Because you were the only person in that room who looked genuinely content," he said. "Everyone else was performing, networking, posturing, calculating their next move, but you were just present, listening to music, observing, existing without needing to prove anything to anyone." "I was hiding," Callie admitted. "My friend dragged me there, but I felt completely out of place. All those people in designer everything, talking about six-figure paintings like they were discussing the weather. And yet you knew more about art curation than most of them." Heat crept up Callie's neck. "I watch a lot of YouTube videos." "No," Elian said firmly. "What you said about the Rothko placement, about creating emotional conversations between pieces, that's not YouTube knowledge, that's intuitive understanding." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, both processing the strange intimacy of the evening. Callie knew she should go upstairs, shower off the chaos of the night and pretend this had never happened, but something about Elian made her want to stay, to understand the man behind the careful composure. "I should go," she said, not moving. "You should," he agreed, not starting the car. "Will you be okay going home to face the family drama?" Elian's laugh was rueful. "By tomorrow morning, my mother will have 3 different strategies to explain away tonight's misunderstanding. She's probably already calling Penelope to arrange damage control." "And you'll let her?" "I always let her." The admission sounded like it surprised him. "It's easier than fighting." Callie reached for the door handle, then paused. "Elian?" "Yeah?" "Sometimes the easiest choice isn't the right choice." She was out of the car and halfway to her building entrance when she heard his car door slam. She turned to find him standing beside the Tesla, hands in his pockets, looking uncertain. "Callie?" "Yeah?" "Would you—" he started, stopped, ran a hand through his hair. Would you maybe want to get coffee sometime? I know tonight was insane and you don't owe me anything, but… Yes, she said, surprising them both with how quickly she answered. Relief flooded his features. Really? Really? She smiled, pulling her keys from her clutch. But next time let's try meeting somewhere with fewer cameras. As she climbed the stairs to her apartment, Callie could hear his car idling outside. Only when she turned on her living room light did she hear him finally drive away. 2 days passed before Elian texted her, and Callie had almost convinced herself the entire evening had been an elaborate dream. Coffee. I know a place without photographers. She stared at the message for longer than necessary, her thumb hovering over the keyboard. Something about the simple text felt loaded with possibility and danger in equal measure. Groundwork coffee on Melrose. 2 p.m. See, perfect. See you there. Callie arrived 15 minutes early, claiming a corner table where she could watch the door. Groundwork was her sanctuary, a neighborhood coffee shop where baristas knew her order, and the Wi-Fi was reliable enough for her design work. Exposed brick walls displayed rotating local art, and the constant hum of conversation created the perfect background noise for thinking. She'd changed clothes 3 times that morning, finally settling on dark jeans, a soft grey sweater, and boots that made her feel grounded. Nothing too fancy, nothing that screamed, I'm trying to impress a millionaire. Just herself. Elian walked in at exactly 2 p.m., and Callie felt her breath catch. Gone was the impeccable suit from the gallery. Instead, he wore dark jeans that fit him perfectly, a navy Henley, and a leather jacket that looked expensive but lived in. His hair was slightly mussed, like he'd been running his hands through it, and the overall effect was devastating in its casual perfection. He spotted her immediately, a smile tugging at the corner of his mouth as he approached. This is much better, he said, gesturing to the cozy atmosphere. No chandeliers in sight. And definitely no reporters, Callie replied, standing to greet him. There was an awkward moment where neither knew if they should hug, shake hands, or simply sit down. They settled on a brief, surprisingly warm embrace that left Callie slightly dizzy. What's good here? Elian asked, studying the chalkboard menu with the same intensity he probably brought to art acquisitions. Depends. Are you a complex flavor profile person, or a just give me caffeine person? Honestly, I usually drink whatever my assistant brings me. I've never actually ordered my own coffee in a place like this. Callie blinked. Never. My world is very curated. Someone else handles the mundane details so I can focus on the work. He looked almost embarrassed by the admission. I realize how that sounds. It sounds lonely, Callie said without thinking, then caught herself. Sorry, I didn't mean to… No, you're right. He ran a hand through his hair, that gesture she was beginning to recognize as his tell when he felt vulnerable. It is lonely. I just never admitted it before. They approached the counter together, and Callie watched Elian study the menu with genuine curiosity. The young barista, a guy with full-sleeve tattoos and gauged ears, looked like he was trying to place Elian's face. I'll have what she's having, Elian said, nodding toward Callie. 2 oat milk cortados with an extra shot, Callie told the barista, then smiled at Elian. Trust me. As they waited for their drinks, Elian examined the art on the walls. Watercolors by a local artist depicting everyday LA scenes. Bus stops, laundromats, corner stores, all rendered with loving detail. These are beautiful, he said, pausing in front of a painting of a woman waiting for the metro, her face illuminated by her phone screen. There's something honest about them. No pretense. The artist's name is Diego Fuentes. He comes in here every Tuesday to work on his laptop. Sells insurance during the day, paints at night. Callie accepted their coffees from the barista with a smile. He told me once that he paints ordinary moments because they're the ones we forget to notice. Elian followed her back to their table, still processing her words. You know the artist personally? I know a lot of the regulars here. Mrs. Chen, who comes in every morning for her green tea latte. She's writing a memoir about growing up in Taiwan. Jordan, the guy who just made our coffee, is saving money for film school. This place is full of stories. They settled into their seats, and Elian took his first sip of the cortado. His eyebrows rose in surprise. This is incredible. Right. You've been missing out on one of life's simple pleasures. Callie wrapped her hands around her mug, studying his face. Can I ask you something? Shoot. What happened after you dropped me off? With your family? Elian's expression darkened slightly. My mother called an emergency family meeting. Apparently my mystery girlfriend has been trending on social media. Mercer Mystery is actually a thing now. Oh God, I'm sorry. Don't be. For the first time in years, my mother was speechless. She kept asking who you were, what your family connections were, whether this was some kind of rebellion. He laughed, but there was no humor in it. The idea that I might genuinely care about someone outside their approved social circle never occurred to her. Callie felt a pang of sympathy for him. And Penelope? Furious. Her father called mine to discuss reputation management. Apparently, being publicly rejected isn't good for the Ashworth brand. You didn't reject her, you escaped an ambush. Try explaining that to people who treat marriage like a merger agreement. Elian leaned back in his chair, and for the first time since she'd met him, he looked truly relaxed. But enough about my family drama. Tell me about your work, real work, not the corporate version. The genuine interest in his voice made Callie's chest warm. I create visual content for small businesses, social media graphics, website designs, brand identity packages. Nothing glamorous, but I help people tell their stories visually. That sounds like curation to me, just a different medium. I never thought of it that way. Show me, Elian said, leaning forward. I want to see your work. Callie hesitated, then pulled out her phone. She scrolled through her portfolio, logo designs for local restaurants, Instagram templates for yoga instructors, a complete rebrand for a vintage clothing boutique in Silver Lake. Elian studied each image with the same attention he'd given the gallery art. These are sophisticated. The color palettes, the typography choices. You have a real eye for this. You don't have to be nice. I'm not being nice. I'm being honest. This work has personality, which is harder to achieve than technical perfection. He handed her phone back, his fingers briefly touching hers. Have you ever considered working with galleries or artists who need visual identity work? People like that wouldn't hire someone like me. Why not? Because I don't have the right connections, the right education, the right what? His voice was gentle but insistent. Callie looked around the coffee shop, at the familiar faces and comfortable chaos that made up her world. Background, she finished quietly. Elian was quiet for a long moment, turning his mug in his hands. Can I tell you something? That night at the gallery, when you analyzed my curation choices, that was the first time anyone had really seen my work. Not my reputation, not my family name, not the politics behind the acquisitions, just the work itself. Their eyes met across the small table, and Callie felt something shift between them. This wasn't about the fake girlfriend favor anymore. This was about two people recognizing something real in each other. Elian, she started, but her phone buzzed against the table. A text from her friend Tanya. Girl, you're famous. Call me now. Attached was a screenshot from an entertainment blog. Mystery woman steals heart of LA's most eligible art heir. Callie's stomach dropped as she read the headline, then looked up to find Elian watching her with growing concern. How bad is it? Elian asked, reading the concern in Callie's expression. She turned her phone screen toward him, and his face went ashen. The blog post featured a grainy but recognizable photo of them from the gallery, his arm around her waist, her hand on his chest, both of them looking intimately absorbed in each other. The article was worse than the headline suggested. It speculated about her identity, her background, even included screenshots from her social media accounts. Someone had done their homework. They found my Instagram, Callie said, her voice tight with disbelief. My LinkedIn. They're calling me a social climber from the wrong side of LA. Elian's jaw clenched as he read. Sources close to the Mercer family question whether this mystery woman has ulterior motives, he quoted. Penelope Ashworth, daughter of prominent art collector Harrison Ashworth, declined to comment but was seen leaving the Mercer estate this morning. Penelope was at your house? My parents' house, Elian corrected grimly. Damage control meetings, probably. This is exactly what I was trying to avoid. Callie's phone buzzed again, then again. Text messages, missed calls, Instagram notifications. Her quiet life was being invaded in real time. I should go, she said, starting to gather her things. This was a mistake. I'm sorry I got you into more trouble with your family. Wait. Elian caught her wrist gently as she stood. You didn't get me into anything. I dragged you into this mess, and now it's affecting my life too. Callie's voice was steady, but he could see the worry in her eyes. I have clients, Elian, small business owners who trust me with their brands. If this turns into some kind of scandal, it won't, he said firmly. I'll call my publicist. We'll issue a statement that we're just friends, that the media misinterpreted. A statement? Callie laughed, but there was no humor in it. You really think it's that simple? That you can just tell the internet to stop being interested? Before Elian could respond, a young woman approached their table hesitantly. College-aged, clutching a phone with obvious nervousness. "Excuse me," she said to Callie. "Aren't you the girl from the Mercer Gallery thing? My roommate sent me the article. Could I maybe get a selfie?" The blood drained from Callie's face. "I'm sorry, but no. I'm just trying to have coffee. Come on, just one quick pic. You're like famous now." She said no. Elian's voice carried a quiet authority that made the girl step back. "Please respect our privacy." The girl retreated, but not before Callie noticed her taking photos from across the room. Other customers were starting to look their way, some whispering and pointing. "This is insane," Callie muttered, pulling on her jacket. "I need to get out of here." They left the coffee shop together, but the parking lot offered no sanctuary. A photographer with a long-lens camera was positioned across the street, and he immediately started shooting as they emerged. "My car," Elian said, guiding her toward the Tesla with protective urgency. Once they were safely inside with tinted windows shielding them, Callie leaned back against the headrest and closed her eyes. "This morning I was a normal person. Tonight I'll probably be a meme. I'm going to fix this," Elian said, his hands gripping the steering wheel. "How? You can't unviral something. You can't take back photos that are already online." She opened her eyes and looked at him. "Your world operates by different rules than mine. When rich people have scandals, they hire PR firms and wait for the news cycle to move on. When normal people get dragged into rich people's drama, it follows them forever." The truth of her words hit him like a physical blow. He'd spent his entire life insulated from real consequences, protected by family, money, and social connections. But Callie was right. She didn't have those shields. "What do you need me to do?" he asked quietly. Callie was quiet for a long moment, watching the photographer across the street adjust his equipment. "I don't know," she admitted. "I've never been in this situation before." Her phone rang. The caller ID showed her mother's number. "I have to take this," she said, answering with forced cheerfulness. "Hi, Mom." Even from the driver's seat, Elian could hear the concerned voice on the other end of the line. Callie's responses were careful, reassuring. Yes, she was fine. No, it wasn't what it looked like in the articles. No, she wasn't dating a millionaire. "Mum, I have to go," she said finally. "I'll call you tonight, okay? Love you too." She hung up and stared at the phone. "My mother saw it on Facebook. Her friend shared the article with the caption, 'Isn't this your daughter?' My mum is probably fielding questions from half the neighborhood right now." The weight of what his impulsive request had cost her was crushing. "Callie, I'm so sorry. If I had thought for even 1 second that it would escalate like this." "You would have what? Let your mother railroad you into an engagement?" She turned to face him fully. "No, you wouldn't have. You were desperate, and I made a choice to help. We both made choices. So what happens now?" Callie looked out at the photographer, who was now talking animatedly on his phone, probably selling his shots to the highest bidder. "Now we figure out how to contain this before it gets worse." "We?" For the first time since reading the article, Callie's expression softened slightly. "You didn't abandon me when that photographer showed up. The least I can do is help you clean up the mess we made together. This isn't your responsibility." "Maybe not," she said, "but walking away now won't make the photos disappear, and something tells me your family isn't going to let this die quietly." As if summoned by her words, Elian's phone buzzed with a text from his mother. "Family meeting. Tonight, 7 p.m. Bring her." He showed Callie the message and she laughed, a sound caught between hysteria and resignation. "Bring her," she repeated. "I'm not an accessory you can just drag to family meetings." "You're right. This is already out of hand." Elian started the car, his mind racing through possibilities. "But maybe that's exactly why we need to face it head on. What are you suggesting?" He pulled into traffic, glancing at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "I'm suggesting that maybe 3 minutes wasn't long enough." "What do you mean 3 minutes wasn't long enough?" Callie asked, her voice carefully controlled. Elian navigated through afternoon traffic toward the hills, his knuckles white against the steering wheel. "I mean, maybe we continue the charade, temporarily, until the media attention dies down and my family accepts that I'm not marrying Penelope. You want me to be your fake girlfriend? For real this time?" "I want to protect you from the fallout I created," he said. "And yes, I could use your help dealing with my family, but this time, it would be on your terms." "A business arrangement with clear boundaries and compensation." Callie turned to stare out the passenger window, watching million-dollar homes climb the hillsides. "Compensation? Whatever you normally make in a month, I'll triple it. Plus, I'll cover any business you lose because of this situation, and I'll introduce you to gallery owners who need design work." His voice was steady, professional. Think of it as a consulting contract. Consulting on what, exactly? How to pretend to be in love with you. The word love hung in the air between them, loaded with implications neither was ready to address. Consulting on how to be myself, Elian said quietly. 2 hours ago I ordered my own coffee for the first time in years. You made me realize how much of my life I've handed over to other people's expectations. They pulled into a scenic overlook above the city, LA sprawling endlessly below them in the golden afternoon light. Elian parked and turned off the engine, but neither moved to get out. How long are we talking about? Callie asked. A few weeks, maybe a month, just long enough to convince everyone that this is real, and then we can have a quiet mutual breakup. You go back to your life, I go back to mine, and my mother finds a new project to obsess over. And in the meantime, we attend a few events together. Family dinners, gallery openings, nothing too demanding. He paused, studying her profile. I know it sounds crazy. It sounds insane, Callie corrected. But then again, so did helping a stranger at a gallery, and I've already done that. She was quiet for a long moment, weighing the impossibility of the situation against the very real problem they both faced. The media attention wasn't going to disappear just because they wanted it to. If anything, a sudden end to their supposed relationship would only fuel more speculation. What about your family? She asked. They're going to see right through me. My mother is many things, but perceptive about genuine emotion isn't one of them. She'll be too busy analyzing your social connections and bank account to question whether our feelings are real. That's depressing. That's my family. Elian's smile was rueful. Look, I understand if this is too much. You didn't sign up for family drama and fake relationships. Just say the word, and I'll hire the best crisis management team money can buy to protect your privacy. Callie pulled out her phone and scrolled through the notifications that hadn't stopped coming. Friend requests from strangers, comments on photos from years ago, messages from people she hadn't spoken to since high school. Her quiet life had been shattered in a matter of hours. If I say yes, she said slowly, I have conditions. Relief flickered across Elian's features. Name them. First, this stays strictly professional. No blurred lines, no confusion about what this is or isn't. Agreed. Second, I maintain my regular clients and my own schedule. I'm not going to be at your beck and call 24/7. Of course. Third, when this ends, it ends completely. No contact, no favors, no awkward run-ins at coffee shops. Clean break. Something shifted in Elian's expression at the last condition, but he nodded. Understood. And fourth, Callie continued, you help me figure out how to explain this to my family and friends. I'm not going to lie to the people I care about, but I can't exactly tell them I'm fake dating a millionaire for money either. We'll figure out a story that works, he promised. Something close to the truth. That we met at the gallery, hit it off, and decided to see where it goes. Callie leaned back against the headrest, still processing the surreal turn her life had taken. This is the craziest thing I've ever agreed to. Is that a yes? She looked at him, really looked at him. There was something vulnerable in his grey eyes, a hopefulness that went beyond just needing her help with his family situation. For all his wealth and sophistication, Elian Mercer seemed fundamentally lonely, trapped in a life that looked perfect from the outside, but felt empty from within. It's a yes, she said, but we need to establish some ground rules about public appearances. I'm not comfortable with too much physical contact, and I'm definitely not kissing you for cameras. No kissing, Elian agreed quickly. Hand-holding, maybe an arm around your shoulder at events. Nothing more intimate than what people would see in the early stages of dating. And how exactly do we practice being convincing without being convincing? The question hung between them, loaded with the awareness that they were attracted to each other despite the artificial nature of their arrangement. The chemistry they'd felt at the coffee shop hadn't been fake. We'll figure it out as we go, Elian said. Trial by fire. His phone buzzed with another text from his mother, this one more insistent. Elian, 7 o'clock, don't make me send a car. Speaking of trial by fire, he said, showing her the message. Are you ready to meet the Mercer family? Callie checked her reflection in the side mirror, smoothing her hair and taking a deep breath. How bad could it be? Elian's laugh was answer enough. The Mercer estate in Bel Air was exactly what Callie had expected, and somehow worse. Massive iron gates opened onto a circular driveway, lined with perfectly manicured hedges. The house itself was a study in understated opulence, clean lines, floor-to-ceiling windows, and enough marble to rebuild a small museum. Everything was beautiful, cold, and utterly impersonal. Second thoughts? Elian asked as they approached the front door. Third and fourth thoughts, Callie admitted. smoothing her black slacks and the silk blouse she'd borrowed from her roommate. But it's too late now. The door opened before they could ring the bell, revealing a woman who could only be Elian's mother. Vivienne Mercer was elegant in the way that required constant maintenance. Platinum hair swept into a perfect chignon, makeup that had probably taken an hour to achieve the natural look, and a cream-colored dress that cost more than Callie's rent. "Elian," she said, air-kissing her son's cheeks, without disturbing her lipstick. Her eyes immediately fixed on Callie with the intensity of a predator sizing up prey. "And you must be the famous mystery woman, Callie Jameson," Callie said, extending her hand with more confidence than she felt. "Thank you for inviting me to your home, Mrs. Mercer." Vivienne's handshake was brief, clinical. "Please, call me Vivienne. Come in, we have much to discuss." The interior was a masterpiece of neutral tones and expensive art. Callie recognized a small Picasso sketch in the foyer, hung with casual indifference next to what looked like an original Hockney. This wasn't just wealth. This was generational power, displayed as casually as family photos. They were led into a sitting room where two other people waited. A silver-haired man with Elian's eyes and jawline stood near a bar cart, while a younger woman perched on a white leather sofa like an elegant bird of prey. "Richard Mercer," the man said, approaching with a politician's smile and a firm handshake. "Elian's father, and this is Penelope Ashworth." The blonde from the gallery looked even more formidable in person. Designer everything, from her nude pumps to her perfectly blown-out hair. She smiled at Callie with the kind of warmth that could freeze water. "So, you're the woman who's caused such a stir," Penelope said, her voice honey over steel. "How exciting for you. Please sit," Vivienne commanded, more than invited, gesturing to an uncomfortable-looking chair that would position Callie directly in their line of fire. "Elian, pour yourself a drink. You look like you need one." As Elian moved to the bar cart, Callie felt suddenly acutely alone. This wasn't a family meeting, it was an interrogation. "So, Callie," Richard began, settling into his chair with practiced ease. "Tell us about yourself. What do you do for work?" "I'm a freelance graphic designer," Callie said, keeping her voice steady. "I work with small businesses, helping them develop their visual branding." "How entrepreneurial," Vivienne said in a tone that suggested entrepreneurship was a communicable disease. "And your family? Are they in the arts as well?" "My father is a mechanic. My mother teaches 3rd grade. Callie met each of their gazes directly. "They're wonderful people." "I'm sure they are," Penelope interjected with false sympathy. "It must be overwhelming suddenly being thrust into our world. The attention, the expectations. Not everyone is equipped to handle that kind of pressure." Elian returned with 2 glasses of wine, handing one to Callie. Their fingers brushed briefly, and she caught something like an apology in his eyes. "Callie handles pressure just fine," he said, sitting beside her on the sofa. The distance between them was carefully calculated, close enough to suggest intimacy, far enough to remain proper. "Of course she does," Vivienne said smoothly. "I'm sure she's very adaptable. But Elian, darling, we need to discuss the practical implications of this situation." "What situation?" Elian's voice carried a warning edge. "The situation where your impulsive behavior has jeopardized months of careful negotiations," Richard said, his diplomatic mask slipping slightly. "The Ashworth partnership isn't just about personal relationships, son. It's about business, about legacy." "Whose legacy?" Elian asked. "Because I don't remember agreeing to sacrifice my personal life for a business deal." "Your personal life affects the family business," Vivienne snapped, then immediately composed herself. "We've worked too hard to build our reputation to have it compromised by misunderstandings." Callie felt heat rise in her chest. "Misunderstandings." "Nothing personal, dear," Vivienne said with a smile that was all teeth. "But surely you understand that appearances matter in our circles. The press is already speculating about your background, your motivations. It's not ideal." "What my mother is trying to say," Penelope added helpfully, "is that this kind of attention can be damaging if not handled properly. Perhaps it would be better for everyone if you and Elian took a step back. Let things cool down before anyone gets hurt." The condescension was so thick Callie could taste it. These people weren't just wealthy. They were used to getting their way through subtle intimidation and social pressure. They expected her to fold, to apologize for existing in their son's life, to disappear quietly back to her appropriate place. But Callie had grown up as one of the few black students in predominantly white schools. She'd built a business in industries that didn't always welcome people who looked like her. She knew how to hold her ground against people who mistook politeness for weakness. "You're right," she said calmly, setting down her wine glass. Appearances do matter, and the appearance right now is that Elian is happy, for the first time in years, according to him. The silence that followed was electric. Vivian's smile never wavered, but something dangerous flickered in her eyes. Happiness is wonderful, she said finally, but it's often temporary. Compatibility, on the other hand, is practical, sustainable. Are you saying we're not compatible? Callie asked. I'm saying that love isn't always enough, Richard interjected. Different backgrounds, different expectations, different social circles, these things matter more than young people want to admit. Dad, Elian's voice was quiet but firm. That's enough. Is it? Vivian leaned forward slightly. Because I've done some research, Callie. You're clearly intelligent, clearly attractive, but you've never moved in our social circles. You don't understand the pressures, the obligations, the sacrifices required. Are you really prepared for that kind of life? The question hung in the air like a challenge. Callie could feel all of them watching her, waiting to see if she would crack under the weight of their scrutiny. Instead, she smiled, the same serene expression she'd worn at the gallery when Elian first approached her. Mrs. Mercer, she said quietly, are you prepared for the possibility that your son might choose happiness over obligation? The room went dead silent, and Callie knew she had just declared war. The silence stretched until it became unbearable. Then Vivian Mercer began to laugh, a sound like crystal breaking. Well, she said, setting down her wine glass with deliberate precision, you certainly don't lack courage. I'll give you that. Richard cleared his throat uncomfortably, while Penelope's perfect composure finally cracked, revealing something cold and sharp underneath. Elian, however, was staring at Callie with something that looked dangerously close to admiration. Courage is admirable, Vivian continued, but it's not always wise. You're playing a game where you don't know the rules, dear. Then maybe it's time to change the game, Callie replied evenly. Enough. Elian stood abruptly, his hand finding Callie's shoulder. This conversation is over. Sit down, Elian, his father commanded, in a voice that probably moved boardrooms and closed million-dollar deals. We're not finished. Yes, we are. Elian's tone brooked no argument. Callie is my guest, and you're treating her like a hostile witness. We're treating her like someone who's disrupted our family, Vivian shot back, her mask of politeness finally slipping. Do you have any idea what this circus has cost us? The Ashworth deal is hanging by a thread because of your dramatic little stunt. Then let it fall, Elian said, and the words dropped into the room like a bomb. I never agreed to that deal in the first place. Penelope stood up so quickly, her wineglass nearly toppled. Elian, you're being irrational. We've known each other since childhood. Our families have been planning this for years. You've been planning this, he corrected. I've been enduring it. The raw honesty in his voice made Callie's chest ache. She could see the years of suppressed frustration, the weight of expectations he'd never asked for, the slow suffocation of living someone else's version of his life. Son, Richard's voice carried a warning, think carefully about what you're saying. Emotions fade. Business relationships last generations. Maybe that's the problem, Elian replied. Maybe I'm tired of living for generations of dead men's expectations. Vivian rose from her chair with the fluid grace of a predator. You're 34 years old, Elian. It's time to stop acting like a rebellious teenager and start thinking like the heir to this family's legacy. What if I don't want to be the heir? The question landed like a physical blow. Even Callie felt the shock of it ripple through the room. This wasn't just about a fake relationship anymore. This was about a man finally speaking truths he'd buried for decades. You don't mean that, Vivian said, but for the first time she sounded uncertain. Don't I? Elian moved closer to Callie, his presence protective and warm. For the first time in years, I'm making my own choices. And if that threatens your business deals, maybe the problem isn't me. Your choices. Penelope's voice rose an octave. Is that what she is? A choice? Some kind of rebellion against everything your family has built? Penelope, Callie said quietly, drawing all eyes to her. Can I ask you something? The blonde woman nodded, clearly not trusting her voice. Do you actually want to marry Elian, or do you just want to marry the Mercer name? The question hung in the air like an accusation. Penelope's mouth opened and closed soundlessly, her perfect composure finally shattered completely. We're compatible, she stammered. We understand each other's worlds. That's not what I asked, Callie pressed gently. Do you love him? Love is... Penelope glanced desperately at Vivian, then at Richard. Love is a luxury. Partnership is practical. That's the saddest thing I've ever heard, Callie said, and she meant it. What would you know about it? Vivian snapped. You've never had to make sacrifices for something bigger than yourself, haven't I? Callie stood, matching the older woman's energy. I've spent my entire life proving myself in rooms where people assumed I didn't belong. I've built a business from nothing because no one was going to hand me opportunities. I've sacrificed comfort and security to pursue something I believed in. The difference is, I chose my sacrifices. And what exactly are you choosing now? Richard asked, his lawyer's instincts sensing weakness. A man you barely know, a lifestyle you're not prepared for, or are you just choosing the money that comes with it? Callie felt Elian tense beside her, and she realized this was the moment that would define everything. They were all waiting for her to reveal her true motivations, to prove their worst assumptions about her character. Instead, she looked directly at Elian, seeing past the expensive clothes and family legacy to the man who'd asked a stranger for help, who'd spent the afternoon learning to order his own coffee, who'd defended her against his own family's prejudices. I'm choosing honesty, she said, something that seems to be in short supply in this house. How dare you? Vivian began, but Elian cut her off. She's right, he said quietly. We haven't been honest about anything. Not about the engagement announcement, not about the business deals, not about what any of us actually want. He turned to face his parents directly. I'm not marrying Penelope. I'm not merging our families for your business convenience. And I'm not going to apologize for finding someone who sees me as more than a strategic asset. You'll regret this, Vivian said, her voice trembling with suppressed fury. Both of you. This infatuation will fade, and when it does, you'll realize what you've thrown away. Maybe, Elian said, but at least it will be my choice to regret. He took Callie's hand, a gesture that felt more real than anything they'd practiced, and headed toward the door. If you walk out that door, Richard called after them, don't expect us to clean up the mess when this all falls apart. Elian paused at the threshold, looking back at his family, at the people who'd raised him but never really seen him. I've been cleaning up your messes my entire life, he said. I think it's time I made some of my own. As they walked to the car, Callie's hand still in his, she could feel the weight of what had just happened. The careful boundaries of their fake relationship had just exploded, and she wasn't sure what was left in the aftermath. That was either the bravest thing I've ever done, she said as they reached the Tesla, or the stupidest. Elian stopped walking and turned to face her, his grey eyes intense in the fading light. Callie, he said, and there was something in his voice that made her breath catch. I need to tell you something. What is it? Callie asked, her heart hammering against her ribs. Elian ran both hands through his hair, pacing beside the car like a caged animal. The security lights from his parents' house cast long shadows across the driveway, and in the distance, the city sparkled like scattered diamonds. This isn't fake anymore, he said finally, his voice rough with emotion. At least not for me. The words hung between them, dangerous and electric. Callie felt the ground shift beneath her feet, all their careful boundaries crumbling in an instant. Elian, I know we said this was business. I know we had rules and conditions and a clean exit strategy. He stopped pacing and looked at her directly, but somewhere between that first night and watching you stand up to my family like a warrior, this became real, and I can't pretend otherwise anymore. Callie's throat went dry. We agreed. I know what we agreed, he said, stepping closer. But did you see yourself in there? The way you defended not just me, but the idea that people should choose their own happiness. The way you made Penelope question everything she thought she wanted. I was just being honest. Exactly. His eyes were intense, searching her face. You're the most honest person I've ever met, and being around you makes me want to be honest too, even when it's terrifying. Callie felt her resolve wavering. The man standing in front of her wasn't the polished, careful curator she'd met at the gallery. This was someone raw and vulnerable, someone who'd just burned bridges with his entire family, partly because of her. This complicates everything, she whispered. I know. We had a plan, a timeline, an exit strategy. I know. Your family already hates me. If this becomes real and it doesn't work out, Callie, he reached for her hands, and she didn't pull away. My family's opinion stopped mattering to me the moment they tried to make you feel small, and as for it not working out, he paused, his thumbs tracing circles on her palms. What if it does? The question was terrifying in its simplicity. What if it did work out? What if this strange, impossible connection they'd stumbled into was actually the beginning of something extraordinary? Before she could answer, her phone buzzed, then buzzed again and again. The vultures are circling, she said, pulling out her phone to see a dozen new notifications. Someone had filmed them leaving the Mercer estate, and the internet had exploded with speculation about the family confrontation. TMZ is calling it a dramatic showdown, she read aloud. Sources close to the family suggest tensions reached a breaking point during a heated dinner meeting. Sources close to the family, Elian repeated bitterly. Probably Penelope. She's always been friendly with gossip bloggers. Another notification popped up, this one from a number Callie didn't recognize. A text message with a photo attached. Her stomach dropped as she opened it. It was a picture of her apartment building, taken from across the street. The message read, "Exclusive interview opportunity. Very generous compensation. Call me." "They found my address," she said, showing Elian the text. "There are probably photographers there right now." Elian's jaw clenched. "You're not going home tonight. It's not safe. Where am I supposed to go? I can't afford a hotel indefinitely, and I'm not going to hide forever. You'll stay with me." The offer was immediate, protective, and completely inappropriate given their complicated situation. "Elian, if I stay at your place, the media will have a field day. Mystery girlfriend moves in after family drama. Can you imagine the headlines?" "I don't care about headlines anymore," he said fiercely. "I care about keeping you safe." They stood in the circular driveway, caught between his family's disapproval and the media's hunger, and Callie realized that their fake relationship had backed them into a very real corner. "This is exactly what your mother warned me about," she said quietly. "The pressure, the scrutiny, the impossible choices. Maybe she was right. Maybe I'm not equipped for this." "Don't," Elian's voice was sharp. "Don't let them make you doubt yourself. You handled that room better than I've ever seen anyone handle my family. You're stronger than any of us. But am I strong enough for this?" She gestured between them, encompassing everything. The attraction they could no longer deny. The media circus, the family drama, the impossible logistics of two people from completely different worlds trying to build something real. Elian was quiet for a long moment, studying her face in the security lighting. When he spoke, his voice was softer, more vulnerable than she'd ever heard it. "I don't know," he admitted. "I've never tried to build something real before. My whole life has been about maintaining appearances, meeting expectations, playing roles. But with you," he paused, searching for words. "With you, I want to try." A car door slammed somewhere in the distance, followed by voices and the click of camera equipment. The photographers had found them. "We need to go," Elian said urgently, moving toward the driver's side. "Decide later. Safety first." As they drove away from Billionaire with paparazzi following at a discreet distance, Callie stared out at the city lights and tried to process everything that had changed in the span of one evening. She'd come to this dinner as his fake girlfriend, playing a role to help him avoid an unwanted engagement. Now she was something else entirely, a woman caught between her carefully controlled life and the terrifying possibility of something she'd never expected to find. "Where are we going?" she asked, as Elian took an exit she didn't recognize. "Somewhere we can think," he said. "Somewhere quiet." And then he glanced at her, and even in the dim light of the car, she could see the hope and fear warring in his expression. "Then we decide if we're brave enough to find out what happens when the pretending stops." Elian drove them to the Griffith Observatory, parking in the nearly empty lot as Los Angeles spread out below them like a constellation fallen to Earth. At this hour, the iconic building was closed, but the view remained breathtaking. Millions of lights twinkling in the darkness, each one representing a life, a story, a choice. They sat in silence for several minutes, both processing the weight of everything that had shifted between them. "I used to come here when I was younger," Elian said finally, his hands still gripping the steering wheel. "Whenever my parents' expectations felt suffocating, I'd drive up here and remind myself that there was a whole world beyond their plans for me." "Did it help?" Callie asked softly. "Sometimes, but I always went back." He turned to look at her, his expression raw with honesty. "I always chose the safe path, the expected path, even when it was killing me slowly." Callie unbuckled her seatbelt and turned to face him fully. "What changed?" "You." The answer was immediate, certain. "That night at the gallery, when you said yes to helping a complete stranger. That was the bravest thing I'd ever witnessed. And then tonight, watching you refuse to be intimidated by people who've spent their lives intimidating others." He shook his head in wonder. "You make me want to be brave, too." "I wasn't being brave," Callie said. "I was terrified. I still am." "Of what?" She looked out at the city, gathering courage to voice the fears that had been building since the moment their eyes met across that gallery. "Of this, of you, of the fact that what started as 3 minutes of pretending has become the most real thing in my life." Elian's breath caught. "Callie, I'm scared of wanting something I was never supposed to have, she continued, the words rushing out like a dam breaking. I'm scared of your world, of cameras and scrutiny and people who think they know what I deserve. But mostly, I'm scared of how much I care about you. The admission hung between them, vulnerable and electric. Outside, the city hummed with late-night energy, but inside their car everything was still except for the thundering of two hearts, finally admitting the truth. You want to know what scares me? Elian asked, reaching for her hand. I'm scared that I've spent 34 years sleepwalking through life, and you're the first person who's made me want to wake up. I'm scared that if I let you go, I'll spend the rest of my life wondering what if. And if we try and it doesn't work, then at least we'll know we were brave enough to try. His thumb traced over her knuckles, a touch that sent electricity up her arm. Callie, I know this is complicated. I know the timing is terrible and the circumstances are insane. But I also know that I've never felt about anyone the way I feel about you. How do you feel about me? She whispered. Elian was quiet for a moment, choosing his words carefully. Like I've been holding my breath my entire life, and you're the first person who's made me remember how to breathe. The metaphor was so beautiful, so perfectly him, that Callie felt tears prick at her eyes. That's terrifying and wonderful and completely impossible. Most worthwhile things are. They sat in silence again, hands intertwined, both feeling the weight of the decision before them. In the distance, a plane traced a path across the star-filled sky, carrying passengers toward unknown destinations. If we do this, Callie said finally, if we make this real, we do it right. No more fake arrangements or business contracts. No more pretending. No more pretending, Elian agreed. And we figure out how to deal with your family, the media, all of it. Together. Together. And if it gets too hard, if the pressure becomes too much, we're honest about that too. No martyrdom, no suffering in silence. Honest about everything, he promised. Callie looked at him, really looked at him. Gone was the polished facade she'd first encountered at the gallery. This was Elian stripped of pretense, vulnerable and real, and more beautiful than any art he'd ever curated. I'm still scared, she admitted. So am I. He lifted their joined hands and pressed a gentle kiss to her knuckles. But I'd rather be scared with you than safe without you. The simple statement broke something open in Callie's chest. All her life, she'd chosen security over risk, practicality over passion. She'd built a careful, controlled existence that protected her from disappointment and heartbreak. But sitting in that car, looking at a man who'd just chosen her over everything he'd ever known, she realized that safety was sometimes just another word for settling. Okay, she said, the word barely a whisper. Okay, let's be brave. Let's stop pretending and see what happens when we choose each other for real. Elian's smile was radiant, transforming his entire face. Are you sure? Instead of answering with words, Callie leaned across the center console and kissed him. It was nothing like the careful, performed intimacy they'd planned for cameras. This was honest, desperate, real. A kiss that tasted like truth and possibility, and the kind of courage that changes everything. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Elian rested his forehead against hers. No more 3-minute arrangements, he murmured. No more fake girlfriend contracts, she agreed. Just us. However messy and complicated and impossible it gets. Just us. As they drove back toward the city, hands linked across the center console, Callie felt something she hadn't experienced in years, the terrifying, exhilarating freedom of jumping without knowing where she'd land. Behind them, the observatory stood sentinel against the sky, a monument to humanity's endless desire to reach for something beyond the safe, the known, the expected, and ahead of them lay everything, uncertain, unscripted, and utterly, completely real. 2 years later, the morning light filtered through the floor-to-ceiling windows of their Venice Beach loft, casting geometric shadows across the hardwood floors. Callie sat curled in the reading nook they'd built into the corner, laptop balanced on her knees, steam rising from her coffee mug. Her business had grown beyond anything she'd imagined, a full creative agency with 3 employees and a client list that included galleries, museums, and artists she'd once only dreamed of working with. Elian emerged from their bedroom, hair still mussed from sleep, wearing the faded UCLA t-shirt he'd bought after Callie mentioned she'd attended there. He'd traded his tailored suits for a more relaxed style, though he still moved with that careful grace that had first caught her attention. "Good morning, beautiful," he murmured, dropping a kiss on the top of her head before heading to the kitchen. "How's the Morrison Gallery project coming?" "Almost finished," Callie replied, not looking up from her screen. Want to see? Elian returned with his own coffee and settled beside her, close enough that she could smell his familiar scent of cedar and clean laundry. She turned the laptop toward him, revealing a sophisticated brand identity for a new contemporary art space in downtown LA. "This is incredible," he said, scrolling through the designs. "The way you've incorporated the architectural elements of the building into the logo, it's brilliant." "You taught me to see spaces differently," Callie said, saving her work and closing the laptop. "Speaking of which, how did the client meeting go yesterday?" Elian's face lit up, the same expression he wore whenever he talked about his new venture. After a spectacular falling out with his parents that had lasted 6 months, he'd started his own curatorial consultancy, focusing on emerging artists and unconventional spaces. No more stuffy galleries or political maneuvering. Just pure, honest appreciation for art and the people who created it. "They said yes," he said, grinning. "The warehouse in the Arts District is officially mine for the next year. We're going to transform it into something nobody's ever seen before." Callie squealed and threw her arms around his neck, knocking over her coffee mug in the process. They both lunged to save her laptop, laughing as they mopped up the spill with the closest thing available, yesterday's newspaper featuring a small item about some gallery opening they'd attended together. These days, their appearances in the society pages were brief and friendly. The media had moved on to newer scandals, and Callie had learned to navigate the occasional photographer with the same grace she brought to everything else. She'd never be comfortable with the attention, but she'd discovered that love made many impossible things bearable. "I have news too," she said, settling back against him once the coffee crisis was resolved. "Good news or great news? Life-changing news?" Elian's expression grew serious, searching her face. "What kind of life-changing?" Instead of answering immediately, Callie reached into the pocket of her robe and pulled out a small white stick. She'd taken the test that morning, staring at the 2 pink lines in disbelief before taking 3 more tests to be sure. Elian stared at the pregnancy test, his mouth opening and closing soundlessly. "I'm pregnant," Callie said, the words feeling surreal even as she spoke them. 8 weeks, according to the test. For a moment, the world went completely still. Then Elian's face broke into the most radiant smile she'd ever seen, and he was kissing her, laughing against her lips, his hands trembling as they framed her face. "We're having a baby," he whispered, as if saying it aloud would make it more real. "We're having a baby," she confirmed, tears streaming down her cheeks. They held each other in the morning light, processing the magnitude of this unexpected gift. It hadn't been planned. They'd talked about children someday, but someday had suddenly become now. "Are you scared?" Elian asked against her hair. "Terrified," Callie admitted. "You? Absolutely, but the good kind of terrified, the kind that means something important is happening." A year later, they stood in the gardens of the Huntington Library, surrounded by 75 friends and family members. Callie wore a simple silk dress the color of champagne, her natural hair styled in an elegant updo adorned with baby's breath. Elian had written his own vows, and when he spoke about how she'd taught him the difference between existing and living, there wasn't a dry eye in the crowd. Even Vivienne and Richard were there, though it had taken the birth of their granddaughter, Zora Emilia Mercer, to fully bridge the gap between expectations and acceptance. Holding their granddaughter for the first time had softened something in both of them, and while their relationship with Callie would never be effortless, it had become genuine. Penelope had married a hedge fund manager from Connecticut and sent a gracious wedding gift with a note that simply read, "Thank you for showing me what I really wanted." She'd seemed genuinely happy in the engagement photos, radiant in a way she'd never been during her time pursuing Elian. But the most meaningful moment of the ceremony came when Callie's father walked her down the aisle. Marcus Jameson, still in his best suit despite the heat, leaned close as they approached the altar and whispered, "He looks at you like you hung the moon, baby girl, that's how you know." Now as the sun set over the Pacific, Callie stood on their terrace, watching Elian push 18-month-old Zora on the swing he'd installed between 2 palm trees. Their daughter's delighted giggles carried on the ocean breeze, mixing with the sound of waves and seagulls. Zora had Elian's grey eyes and Callie's stubborn streak, plus a smile that could charm anyone within a 50-foot radius. She was fearless in the way that only toddlers could be, approaching the world with curiosity and absolute confidence that she was loved. "Higher, Daddy, higher," Zora demanded, her chubby hands gripping the swing's chains. "Any higher and you'll be in orbit," Elian laughed, but he pushed her a little higher anyway. Callie's hand drifted unconsciously to her still flat stomach, where baby number 2 was just beginning to make their presence known. They'd find out next week whether Zora would have a brother or sister, but for now it was enough to know their family was growing. Her phone buzzed with a text from Tanya, the friend who'd dragged her to that gallery opening what felt like a lifetime ago. Saw the Architectural Digest feature on your house. You're living the dream, girl. Callie smiled, looking around at their unconventional life. It wasn't the dream she'd planned, but it was better, messier, more complicated, infinitely more real than anything she could have imagined. Come here, Elian called, scooping up Zora and extending his free arm toward Callie. Family hug before bath time. As she walked toward them, Callie remembered that night at the observatory when they'd decided to be brave, to choose each other despite the impossibility of it all. They'd had no idea what they were getting into, the challenges of blending their worlds, the media scrutiny that took months to fade, the family drama that required patience and forgiveness from all sides. But they'd also had no idea about the joy, the quiet Sunday mornings, the inside jokes, the way Elian still brought her coffee every morning exactly the way she liked it, the way she'd taught him to find beauty in ordinary moments, and he'd shown her that she was worthy of extraordinary love. "What are you thinking about?" Elian asked as she melted into their embrace. "Just remembering," she said, pressing a kiss to Zora's curly head. "That night, you asked me to pretend to be your girlfriend for 3 minutes. Best 3 minutes of my life," he said, kissing her temple, "though I'm pretty fond of all the minutes that came after, even the messy ones, especially the messy ones." As they headed inside for Zora's bath time, Callie caught their reflection in the sliding glass door. 3 people who'd somehow become a family, who'd chosen love over fear, truth over convenience, messy reality over perfect pretense. Sometimes the best stories began with lies that became true. Would you have the courage to say yes to 3 minutes that could change your entire life? Have you ever made a split-second decision that led to something beautiful? Share your thoughts about taking risks for love in the comments below. Your participation in the channel is very important. Please leave your opinion in the comments. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and comment your thoughts. Your participation is very important to us. See you next time.